This approach feels brutal at first. There's no emotional cushioning. But over time, something surprising happens. You feel lighter. Not because life is easier, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. No longer defending an identity that doesn't match your actions. No longer pretending. That honesty is freeing. You stop needing to explain yourself to yourself. You simply act. And action, when aligned, creates a quiet confidence, not arrogance, certainty that you can endure discomfort, certainty that you can correct mistakes, certainty that you don't collapse when conditions are imperfect. That certainty is rare. Most people don't trust themselves because they've never proven they can act without emotional permission. Stoicism gives you that proof over and over. But here's the final challenge. Once identity is dismantled, once desire is disciplined, once behavior is aligned, you face something unavoidable. Mortality, not as an abstract idea, as a deadline. And Stoicism has a perspective on this that makes everything else sharper. That's where the final block goes. Because without this final lens, everything else loses urgency. And urgency, properly understood, is not panic. It's precision. Mortality is the lens Stoicism never removes. Not to frighten you, to focus you. Most people treat death like a distant rumor, something abstract, something that happens to others. Stoicism refuses that distance. It brings death close, not emotionally, but practically. Because when death is vague, time feels infinite. And when time feels infinite, waste feels harmless. Days blur. Postponement feels safe. Delay feels reversible. Stoicism shatters that illusion. It says, you do not have unlimited time to become who you respect. Not someday, not later, now. This is where Stoicism becomes brutally clarifying. Every argument that once felt important shrinks. Every ego-driven conflict loses urgency. Every habit you keep meaning to change suddenly looks dangerous. Because death doesn't negotiate with intention. It only meets action. The Stoics practiced memento mori not as a ritual, but as a filter. They asked themselves one simple question. If this were my last chance to act correctly, would I still choose this? That question destroys nonsense. Petty resentment dissolves. Performative ambition collapses. Comfort-driven decisions feel obscene, not because pleasure is wrong, but because distraction becomes expensive when time is finite. Stoicism doesn't make life bleak. It makes it precise. You stop scattering energy on things that don't survive scrutiny. You stop postponing integrity. You stop waiting to become disciplined. You stop assuming there will be a better moment later. because later is not promised. This realization does something subtle. It replaces urgency with seriousness, not panic, not desperation. Seriousness. You begin to treat your actions as if they matter, because they do. Most people live as if their behavior exists in isolation. Today doesn't matter. This choice doesn't matter. This hour doesn't matter. Stoicism says that's false. Every choice trains you toward clarity or confusion, toward strength or fragility, toward dignity or regret. And regret, once time runs out, has nowhere to go. The Stoics feared one thing above all else: not death, not pain, not loss. They feared reaching the end and realizing they lived beneath their capacity. That fear wasn't emotional. It was ethical. They believed that failing to use your reason, your discipline, your ability to act with integrity was the only true tragedy. Everything else could be endured. This belief changes how you relate to difficulty. Hardship stops feeling unfair. It becomes material. Loss stops feeling like an interruption. It becomes instruction. Even death itself becomes a boundary that sharpens life. This is why Stoicism does not chase happiness. Happiness is too fragile, too dependent on circumstance. The Stoic chases something heavier: dignity. Dignity doesn't require comfort. It doesn't require approval. It doesn't require success. It requires alignment. Alignment between what you know is right and what you actually do. That alignment is possible in any circumstance, which is why Stoicism was practiced by slaves and emperors alike. External position didn't matter. Internal conduct did. This is deeply offensive to a culture that defines worth by outcome. Stoicism says outcome is secondary. You can fail with dignity. You can lose with integrity. You can suffer without collapsing. And that ability is more valuable than any external win. Once you internalize this, fear loses leverage. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of missing out. They all depend on the assumption that outcome defines you. Stoicism removes that assumption. You are defined by how you meet reality. Nothing more, nothing less. This creates a strange calm. Not the calm of ignorance, the calm of acceptance. You stop asking life to guarantee safety. You stop asking people to validate you. You stop asking circumstances to cooperate. You prepare instead. Preparation replaces hope. Not cynical preparation, honest preparation. You prepare to act correctly even when it's hard. You prepare to lose things without losing yourself. You prepare to endure discomfort without abandoning principle. This is not a comfortable life, but it is a clean one, clean of excuses, clean of self-betrayal, clean of wasted potential. Stoicism does not promise you happiness. It promises you something rarer, that when your life ends, you will not have to look away from it. You will be able to say, I did not live perfectly, but I lived deliberately. I did not control outcomes, but I controlled myself. I did not avoid pain, but I avoided cowardice. And in the end, that is enough. Not because the world applauded you, but because you did not abandon the one responsibility that was always yours: to live with reason, to act with discipline, to face reality without flinching. That is the Stoic life, and once you understand that, there is nothing left to search for, only something to practice. Every day, after mortality sharpens everything, there's one illusion still standing. The illusion that understanding is enough. Most people stop here. They hear the truth. They agree with it. They feel its weight. And then they return to old patterns, not because they disagree, because they underestimate inertia. Stoicism is brutally clear about this. Insight does not change behavior. Pressure does not change behavior. Even fear does not change behavior. Only systems do. This is where Stoicism becomes deeply practical and deeply unpopular. Because it doesn't ask what you believe. It asks what you repeatedly do when no one is watching. The Stoics knew something modern culture ignores. Your life is not shaped by moments of realization. It's shaped by default behaviors. What you do when tired. What you do when bored. What you do when slightly uncomfortable. Those moments decide everything. Most people build their life around willpower, and willpower is fragile. It collapses under stress. It disappears under fatigue. It evaporates under emotion. Stoicism doesn't rely on willpower. It replaces it with systems. Systems that make the right action the easiest action. The Stoic doesn't ask, can I resist this temptation? He asks, why is this temptation even here? He removes friction where it weakens him. He adds friction where it protects him. This is not weakness, it's strategy. Most people exhaust themselves trying to be strong in bad environments. Stoicism redesigns the environment. If distraction weakens you, reduce exposure. If indulgence destabilizes you, remove access. If certain conversations drain you, limit them. Not dramatically, quietly. You don't announce discipline, you engineer it. This is where Stoicism looks boring from the outside. No grand declarations, no radical transformations. Just consistent structure, but structure outlasts motivation every time. This is why Stoics value routine so highly. Not because routine is exciting, because it's reliable. A routine doesn't care how you feel, it executes anyway. And execution builds identity far more reliably than intention. The Stoic understands that freedom is not the absence of structure, it's the right structure. Without structure, your life is dictated by impulse. With structure, your impulses lose authority. This is deeply threatening to a culture obsessed with spontaneity. But spontaneity without discipline turns into chaos. Stoicism accepts this trade-off. It chooses order over excitement, consistency over novelty, depth over stimulation. This choice isolates you, not socially at first, mentally. You stop resonating with the same fears, the same outrage, the same manufactured urgency. You notice how often people are reacting to things that don't deserve reaction. News cycles, online arguments, performative crises. Stoicism teaches you to ask one question before reacting to anything. Is this within my control? If not, attention is withdrawn. This is not apathy, it's conservation. Attention is finite, energy is finite, time is finite. The Stoic spends them deliberately. This deliberate spending creates another uncomfortable shift. You become less entertaining. You don't exaggerate emotions. You don't amplify drama. You don't participate in outrage rituals. Some people will find you dull. Stoicism accepts this cost because being impressive is irrelevant compared to being stable. Stability is invisible until everything else collapses. And collapse always comes. Markets crash, relationships end, health declines, plans fail. Stoicism doesn't pretend otherwise. It prepares you to remain intact when externals fall apart. That preparation looks like repetition. Doing the same disciplined actions day after day without emotional reward. This builds something rare. Trust, not trust from others. Trust in yourself. You know how you'll act under pressure because you've practiced under boredom. You know how you'll respond to stress because you've rehearsed restraint daily. That self-trust is priceless. Most people don't trust themselves because they've never proven they can endure discomfort without escape. Stoicism gives you that proof again and again, but systems alone aren't enough because systems can become empty if they lose meaning. Which is why Stoicism insists on one final integration. Action must align not just with discipline, but with values. And values must be lived, not declared. This is where Stoicism draws its final line between performance and principle, between looking disciplined and being disciplined, between identity as image and identity as action. The Stoic doesn't care how his life appears. He cares whether it holds up under scrutiny. And scrutiny is relentless, not from others, from time. Time will test everything, every habit, every compromise, every excuse, and time is undefeated. Stoicism doesn't try to beat time. It aligns with it. It says, act now, not because you're afraid, but because delay trains weakness. Choose now, not because it's urgent, but because indecision compounds. Live deliberately, not because you'll be rewarded, but because anything less is a quiet form of self-betrayal. This is the Stoic standard. Not perfection, not purity, consistency. Consistency between what you know and what you do. That consistency is heavy, but it's also grounding. It gives your life shape. And once your life has shape, pressure no longer distorts it. It reveals it, which leads to the final realization that most people never reach. Stoicism is not about building a strong life. It's about removing everything that makes life weak. And once weakness is removed, what remains doesn't need motivation. It moves on principle alone. That's where this is heading. Because once systems, discipline, identity, and mortality align, one final question remains. What is all of this for? And that answer is not abstract, it's lived. That's what the next block resolves. At this point, most people expect a revelation, a grand answer, a final philosophy, something that ties everything together neatly. Stoicism refuses to give that, because meaning is not something you arrive at. It's something you demonstrate. Most lives feel empty, not because they lack purpose, but because purpose was treated as a thought experiment. What do I want to do with my life? What am I meant for? What is my calling? Stoicism sees these questions as distractions, not because they're useless, but because they delay action. You don't find meaning by asking. You create it by carrying responsibility. Responsibility is where meaning hides. Not glamorous responsibility, not heroic responsibility. Ordinary responsibility, taken seriously. Showing up when it's inconvenient. Doing what you said you would do when no one checks. Bearing weight without turning it into drama. The Stoics believe that meaning emerges when you stop asking life to entertain you and start asking how you can be useful. That idea is deeply offensive today. Usefulness sounds small, humble, unimpressive, but usefulness grounds you. It removes existential anxiety by replacing it with function. You're no longer wondering whether your life matters. You're making it matter through contribution. This doesn't mean living for others. It means living beyond yourself. Ego shrinks when responsibility expands, and when ego shrinks, suffering decreases. Most suffering comes from self-obsession. How am I perceived? Am I ahead or behind? Am I doing enough compared to others? Stoicism cuts this loop. It says, comparison is irrelevant when your standard is internal. You stop measuring yourself against others and start measuring yourself against your principles. That shift changes everything. Envy dissolves, resentment weakens, ambition clarifies. You no longer chase recognition, you chase competence. Competence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself, but it creates confidence that doesn't need reassurance. The Stoic understands that a meaningful life is not one filled with pleasure, but one filled with obligation, willingly carried. That obligation gives structure to time. Without obligation, time leaks. Days dissolve into distraction. Weeks disappear without memory. With obligation, time condenses. Each day has weight. Each action has consequence. This makes life feel fuller, even when it's harder. Stoicism never promised ease. It promised solidity. A solid life can absorb impact without collapsing. A shallow life cannot. This is why Stoicism doesn't chase balance. Balance implies constant adjustment between pleasure and pain. Stoicism chooses direction. Some days are heavy, some days are light. The direction doesn't change. This steadiness creates momentum, and momentum eliminates existential doubt. You don't question your purpose when you're busy fulfilling it. This is where Stoicism quietly resolves the problem of meaning, not through philosophy, through practice. You wake up knowing what must be done. You act according to your standards. You carry your responsibilities without complaint. Meaning emerges as a byproduct, not as a feeling, as a fact. You are useful. You are reliable. You are aligned. That alignment creates peace that doesn't depend on circumstance. This is why Stoicism scales with age. As youth fades, as options narrow, as illusions collapse, Stoicism grows stronger because it was never built on fantasy. It was built on reality. Reality doesn't promise happiness. It offers responsibility. And responsibility, when accepted voluntarily, turns weight into purpose. This is where Stoicism separates itself from every modern self-help ideology. It doesn't ask you to feel fulfilled. It asks you to act honorably. Fulfillment follows or it doesn't. Either way, your life stands upright. But there is one final tension that remains unresolved until the end. if meaning comes from responsibility and discipline is required to carry it? What happens when you fail? Not once, repeatedly. What happens when discipline slips, standards drop, and you act beneath who you know you can be? Most philosophies collapse here. Stoicism does not. Because Stoicism has an answer for failure that is neither comforting nor destructive. And that answer is where everything closes. That's the final block. Failure is inevitable, not hypothetical, not occasional. Certain, Stoicism never tried to eliminate failure. It tried to neutralize its power. Most people are destroyed by failure not because they fail, but because they identify with it. I failed quietly becomes I am a failure. And once identity absorbs failure, discipline collapses. Stoicism draws a hard line here. Action can fail, judgment can be wrong, effort can miss the mark. Character is not defined by any of that. Character is defined by response. This is one of Stoicism's most misunderstood positions. It does not demand perfection. It demands correction immediately, without drama. The Stoic does not spiral after failure. He does not narrate it. He does not punish himself emotionally. He asks one question: what failed in the system? Not, what is wrong with me? Because what is wrong with me leads to shame, and shame leads to paralysis. Stoicism rejects shame entirely as a tool for improvement, not because shame is painful, but because it's ineffective. Shame looks inward without solving anything. Correction looks forward. The Stoic treats failure the way an engineer treats a malfunction. Identify the fault, adjust the structure, resume operation. No identity crisis, no self-concept collapse, just refinement. This mindset is brutally efficient. It allows you to fail without losing momentum. Most people fail once and emotionally collapse for weeks. They stop trusting themselves, they loosen standards, they lower expectations. Stoicism refuses this. It says one failure does not erase discipline. Only repeated surrender does. And surrender is a choice. This is where Stoicism becomes quietly unbreakable. Because nothing can permanently derail you unless you abandon correction. Even long periods of weakness can be reversed. Even years of misalignment can be rebuilt. Not emotionally, practically. One corrected action at a time. This is why Stoicism never romanticizes redemption. There is no transformation moment. There is no fresh start. There is only continuation. You don't restart life. You adjust and proceed. This removes pressure. You don't need to become someone new tomorrow. You need to act slightly better today. That's it. Stoicism lowers the emotional bar and raises the behavioral one. And behavior compounds faster than emotion ever will. This also reframes guilt. Guilt is only useful if it produces correction. If it doesn't, it's indulgence. Stoicism has no patience for indulgent suffering. Suffering that doesn't teach is wasted. The Stoic accepts pain only if it sharpens judgment. Otherwise, he discards it. This approach offends people who equate growth with emotional intensity. Stoicism does not. It equates growth with alignment. You either acted according to principle or you didn't. If you didn't, adjust. No ceremony required. This makes Stoicism look cold. It isn't. It's compassionate in a way that doesn't flatter weakness. Because weakness doesn't need affirmation. It needs structure. Stoicism provides structure, not rules imposed from outside. Standards chosen internally, and standards once chosen become anchors. When everything else fluctuates, mood, motivation, circumstance, standards remain. This is why Stoicism produces calm people in chaotic environments. Not because they don't feel, because feeling doesn't override principle. They are not immune to failure. They are immune to collapse. Collapse only happens when identity is fragile. Stoicism builds identity on conduct, not outcome. So when outcomes disappoint, identity remains intact. This is the final gift of Stoicism. Resilience without bitterness. You don't harden, you stabilize. You don't withdraw from life, you engage with it cleanly. You stop needing the world to cooperate for you to act correctly. And that's real freedom, not the freedom to do whatever you want, the freedom to act according to reason even when it's uncomfortable. Once you have that, nothing external can take it from you. Not failure, not loss, not criticism, not time, because your worth is no longer negotiated. It's practiced daily, quietly, without witnesses. That is the Stoic life in its final form. Not a philosophy you admire, a discipline you live. And once lived long enough, it stops feeling heavy. It becomes natural. Not because life got easier, but because you finally became strong enough to meet it without flinching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel Stoic Freedom. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel Stoic Freedom.